The Great Pyramid is the largest of the three main pyramids forming the Giza complex. The second largest pyramid, traditionally associated with Khufu's son, Khafre, is only 3 meters shorter than the Great Pyramid, which stands up 140 meters tall. But it was built on slightly higher ground, and staggeringly, the capstone would have been aligned at an identical elevation above sea level. Quite how they achieved that is unresolved, and the construction is simply stupendous. The mass of the main Giza pyramid is estimated at 6 million tons, and its volume is about 2.5 million cubic meters. Based on these estimates, if it was constructed within Khufu's reign, it would require the installation of 800 tons of stone every day. Hello everybody. Today we're going to look at a well-known topic, the Giza pyramids and the Sphinx. There is still new things to be said about them, believe it or not. The main buildings of the Giza complex comprise the 2 Great Pyramids and the enigmatic Sphinx. The conventional view is that the 2 largest pyramids in Egypt were constructed by the pharaohs Khufu and one of his sons, Khafre. The lengths of their reigns are generally agreed to have been around 25 years, maybe a little less. Yet Khufu is credited with constructing the Great Pyramid, and his son Khafre with the slightly smaller pyramid and the Sphinx. Unsurprisingly, exact dates of their reigns are disputed, but agreed to have been in 26th century BC.
What evidence links these buildings to these pharaohs?
Not much, frankly. One morning, during the first expedition that actually probed its way into the Great Pyramid, someone found a rough scrawling on the initial entrance tunnel, which said something to the effect, this was built for Khufu, also known as Cheops. This is attributed to construction workers at the time the pyramid was built. But no one would have written the pharaoh's name in that way. A pharaoh's name, particularly on his own building, would be contained in a royal cartouche, an elaborate drawing, which would include his full name, his throne names. You don't just write his basic name. That would be absolute sacrilege. Indeed, no inscription of any kind has been found anywhere inside the Great Pyramid. You would expect, if it was a tomb and may have been robbed, although there's no evidence that the pyramid had been penetrated before the early 19th century attempts to get in, but there's no remains whatsoever of any funereal goods, of empty canopic jars, of anything at all. Moreover, there are no inscriptions anywhere. Normally there would be brightly coloured hieroglyphs and images for the pharaoh to feel proud of when he woke up. Nothing. Even the spaces which we name as the king's chamber and the queen's chamber is simply on a hunch. There's no evidence that that's what they were. This has naturally led to many theories about why and by whom these pyramids were actually built. The Great Pyramid is the largest of the 3 main pyramids forming the Giza complex, which share a perfect north-south alignment. The second largest pyramid, traditionally associated with Khufu's son, Khafre, is only 3 meters shorter than the Great Pyramid, which stands up 140 meters tall. But it was built on slightly higher ground, and staggeringly, the capstone would have been aligned at an identical elevation above sea level. Quite how they achieved that is unresolved. These pyramids and the Sphinx are built on a scale quite different to any other Egyptian monuments. They appear older than any other major Egyptian constructions. Again, it appears these incredible construction skills apparent in these works differ from other supposedly earlier and later efforts, all smaller, that show design limits and flaws, so you end up with simplified step pyramids or the bent pyramid, where they couldn't quite work out the angle at which they could construct the Sphinx. There are many other problems as well. These two pharaohs lived in the 26th century BC, but depictions have been found of the Sphinx in ancient Egyptian and Sumerian art dating back well before the dynastic period, up to 1,000 years earlier. Some have linked Khafre to the repair work performed on the outer limestone casing of the Sphinx, suggesting it was already old during Khafre's time. The inventory stela, believed to date only from around 670 BC, but whose age is disputed, includes an intriguing statement that the plans of the image of Hor-em-Akhet, Horus of the horizon, were brought from the Hall of Records to the site of the Sphinx by Khafre, which implies restoration work rather than construction. Egyptian records from Amenhotep II, who ruled in the 15th century BC, so that's 1100 years after the two pharaohs who are supposed to have built the two big pyramids, also refers to the Sphinx as Hor-em-Akhet, Horus of the horizon, and refers to the nearby Giza pyramids as the pyramids of Hor-em-Akhet. No, this is only 1,000 years after the reigns of Khafre and Khufu, suggesting that contemporary records did not associate these pyramids with the pharaohs that conventional historians do today. Also, the references to Horus chime with the Edfu Temple inscriptions that we talked about a few episodes back, that speak of Horus and the establishment of the first grand sacred buildings near Memphis in the aftermath of floods which devastated Egypt, which we think may have been around 10,000 BC, if they were linked to the Kephallonia meteor impact. Once you appreciate just how tenuous the link to Khufu and Khafre is, you become more open to considering other explanations.
Can you give me an idea of the scale of the Giza pyramids and how they could have been constructed?
Yes, and the construction is simply stupendous. The mass of the main Giza pyramid is estimated at 6 million tons, and its volume is about 2.5 million cubic meters. Based on these estimates, if it was constructed within Khufu's reign, it would require the installation of 800 tons of stone every day. Based on the calculated number of stone blocks, 2.3 million, that means placing 12 blocks into place every hour of the pharaoh's reign, day and night. These calculations are based on Sir Flinders Petrie and were published in 1882 in his book The Pyramids and Temples of Giza. But even with this sustained pace of work, the casing stones and the inner chamber blocks of the Giza pyramid fit together with extremely high precision. Based on measurements taken on the northeastern casing stones, the mean opening of the joints is only 0.5 centimetre wide. The sides of the base are 230 metres long, with a maximum difference in any length of any side as 58 millimetres. That is unbelievable. Whilst the error from perfect square alignment of the four sides is 12 seconds of arc, such accuracy seems well beyond what could be achieved with simple eyesight. Some kind of equipment must have been used to achieve such accuracy. The requirement to deliver precisely cut and smooth blocks into positions tens or even up to 140 metres up in the structure, and often deep within the structure around galleries, implies the existence of an accurate and detailed three-dimensional model available at the quarry, at stone preparation site, and in situ. The more one ponders the task, the greater the gap in our knowledge appears. Even the management challenge of such a project seems incredible. how to recruit, train, sustain and house such a labour force, and how to set up and manage the supply chain for the materials, the quarrying, cutting, polishing, transport and fitting of around 2.3 million blocks, many of which show individual shaping. And this was supposedly accomplished not only without any computers, but utilising the clumsy Egyptian numbering system. Measurements being by cubits and palm widths, and on-site measuring using ropes and sticks.
Is there any physical evidence that point to the age of these constructions?
Difficult. Let's start with the Sphinx. A lot of analysis has been done of the weathering of the surface of the Sphinx, and it's revealed a predominance of vertical erosion channels. Indeed, it's now widely agreed by geologists as being caused by rainwater, not flooding, as water levels rose, but of sustained rainfall over a very long period. The weathering is vertical, not horizontal. Throughout the dynastic period, the Sphinx sat in permanent dry desert conditions, but traditional archaeologists ascribe surface weathering to wind-borne erosion by particles of sand. But that would obviously cause horizontal weathering, not vertical. Climatic analysis shows the current desert climate was established around Giza thousands of years before the start of the dynastic period, and at least since 6000 BC. Before 6000 BC, the rainfall would have been light and failing. For really torrential rainfall, one would need to look back to the meteor impact events, which vented vast quantities of water vapour into the atmosphere. Such events could well have produced biblical scale downpours lasting 40 days or more. The Hiawatha impact of 10765 BC and the Kephallonia impact of around 9620 BC, which we talked about previously, would have caused torrential downpours lasting for many weeks. Now, recently, a geologist and a geophysicist have separately opined much earlier dates for the Sphinx, which broadly corroborate with each other. Dr. Robert Schoch, a geologist reporting to the Geological Society of America in 1991, that meteorological studies of the Sphinx, its weathering, watermarks, layering, indicated a date for it being carved out of solid rock must have been well before 5000 BC, possibly as early as 10,000 BC. A geophysicist, Dr. Thomas Dobecki, from Houston, working with Anthony West, an Egyptologist from New York, also concluded a construction date in the range 5000 to 7000 BC based on the amount of weathering evident in the carved rock making up the body of the Sphinx and the quarry that was excavated around it. This research has been well reviewed for years, but is always rejected as being impossible because the native Egyptians at that time were believed to be simple hunter-gatherers without the knowledge, skills or organisation to undertake such a huge project. The tsunami caused by the Kephallonia impact of 9600 BC may have washed right over the Sphinx, but evidence of that will have been eroded by torrential rain that followed, and the remaining 3 millennia or so of tropical climate rainfall before the climate turned arid.
And what about the Great Pyramid?
Yeah, turning to the pyramids, there's much speculation. So I'll focus on one well-supported theory that's come from the recent development of astroarchaeology. The science that was born from the conclusion that almost all ancient temples were actually also observatories. This enabled alignments to key celestial events to date construction of the temples by reference to simply rewinding precession, the move of the helical rising of a constellation backwards through the zodiac over time. We track back into the preceding zodiac every 2,160 years if you divide the sky by 12. This dating can be finessed by also tracking back movements in the nutation cycle, which is a remnant from when Earth was hit by a massive meteor or whatever part of a planet when it was very young, maybe only around 50 million years old. And like a bell being struck, Earth is still vibrating from that massive impact, and that causes our axis to wander. Astroarchaeology provides a clear date, presumably the completion date or the commemoration date of the complex. And it actually indicates a date of 9023 BC, quite precise. That is star rise for Regulus at the vernal equinox. Regulus is the dominant star in the constellation of Leo. And Leo, of course, is the constellation of the zodiac that was in the ascendant 9000 BC. So it all clicks. There is also a date log provided by the rising of the three kings. The three kings are the brightest stars in Orion's belt. So these two factors coincide in that year. Indeed, the rising of the three kings has been a prominent factor for Egypt ever since. Indeed, it may have been borrowed in the gospel stories of Jesus' birth. We'll come back to that in the future. The date for the commemoration of the Sphinx might also mark the date for the commemoration of the Great Pyramid. A researcher named Roger Cunningham identified a star constellation map that apparently the builders made in the ceiling of the air shaft that leads upwards from what we call the Queen's Chamber towards the pyramid's outer surface. The map is engraved into a rock just above Gutenberg's door. That's the name given to a stone plug at the top of this air shaft. The available photo of the shaft ceiling is a bit fuzzy, since high-resolution photos have not yet been released by the National Geographic Society. However, according to Cunningham, the ceiling displays a map of the ancient sky as it would have been seen around 9200 BC, plus or minus 400 years. So it's not that precise. But interestingly, it coincides with the Regulus time marker, 9023 BC. Cunningham concluded that the builders of the pyramid had left this map intentionally as a time capsule message marking the date of the pyramid's construction or commemoration. Pure speculation on my part, but I suggest 9023 BC might have been seen as an astronomically auspicious date to celebrate the reconstruction following the devastation of the Kefalonia impact tsunami and the construction of the magnificent Giza complex. Our next session will look at what any natural reaction to accounts of previous devastation visited from above would lead to. The exhortation to dig. Thank you.